set up with passwords and whatnot. By the time we had coffees made, all the other staff had arrived and I'd been introduced to the other corrections officers and office staff. I soon learned my position was replacing a man named Wayne, and that I was the youngest on the corrections officers team by at least 2 decades. Still, my enthusiasm couldn't be swayed. For the rest of the morning, Cheryl sat with me in my office, showing me the government computer programs we used for reporting and accounting. I was given passwords and a security pass for the car park, and my photo ID badge. I filled in work uniform request forms, sorted out employment forms, tax forms, and about another dozen different government forms for everything they did and didn't need to know. After lunch, Terrell knocked on my open door. "I'm making some work placement calls this afternoon. Dave thought you might want to come." I grinned. "Sure." Out of all the other officers, Terrell was probably the youngest. At a rough guess, he looked maybe 40, but it was hard to tell. Those 40 years looked like they'd been hard, and whether his bent nose and the scar through his eyebrow were from football or fighting, I didn't know. Keen to get out into the field, I grabbed my ID badge from my desk, and as soon as I got to the door, Terrell handed me a dozen manila folders. Okay, so some work placement calls looked more like 12. I grinned at him, and Terrell shook his head at me. As we drove to our first job site, Terrell told me a bit about procedure and how all the in-house training didn't really prepare anyone for the real job. There was so much legislation and so many rules, boxes to be ticked, and the paperwork. Don't even get him started on the paperwork. He explained how he also worked as the Indigenous liaison officer for some cases, and he'd smiled handsomely when he spoke of his accomplishments. I imagine 20 years ago he would have been hot, given dark hair and dark eyes were my type. And given the wedding band on his finger, I assumed he made someone very happy. I liked him, as far as first impressions went, and as the afternoon went on, my opinion of him was reaffirmed. We met case after case, parolee after parolee. Guys who were getting their lives back on track, working hard, honest jobs. One was a tyre fitter, one worked the back dock of the wholesalers, 2 worked at the abattoir, 2 worked on road crews for the local council, 1 worked at the city library, and 1 worked at a nursing village, helping the old folk manage their gardens. They seemed like decent guys who just got dealt a shitty hand in life. I knew firsthand how life could change on a dime. How sometimes all it took was getting laid off work and trying to make easy money to feed a family. Sometimes parents didn't give a shit and kids had to steal stuff to survive. Sometimes they got lost in the system, trampled on by life, blinded by the fact no one seemed to give a rat's ass. Sometimes they were forgotten. Sometimes it was desperation or mental illness or addiction that kept company with bad decisions and unfortunate circumstances. And sometimes good people did bad things. Sometimes they weren't good people at all. Sometimes evil lurked behind blank stares. And sometimes it screamed. Terrell reminded me of that on my 3rd day tagging along with him. The last case of the day was a home visit, and he said we weren't going to be well received, and he wasn't wrong. Her name was Tracy Coombs, and she'd done 3 years at Dalwinia, a women's correctional facility outside of Sydney. Normally, Teresa would handle the female cases. Teresa was another parole officer I'd met on my first day. I hadn't seen her since because she was in Sydney doing some compliance refresher course we were all expected to do at times. But Ms. Coombs is due for a visit, Terrell said. He looked out the windshield at the fibro-clad house in question. She knows to expect us, but that don't mean she's going to be happy about it. And she really wasn't happy. Terrell knocked on the rickety front door. It opened barely a crack, and her warm welcome began with, "What the fuck do you want?" Department of Corrections.